Hey, it's me, MLB. Here is this week's Period Comfort One Shot. This one is a little obscure, but this is our archaic bird boy we're talking about here, so you all should have already clocked that it was going to be something different. But let me not spoil it, let's just get to it. Here is The Reaping, Tokoyami ex female listener. You and Tokoyami had been dating for a month now. Everything had been going great. He was cool, mysterious, dark, and a little emo, but so are you, so it was a match made in heaven, right? But let me just backtrack a little bit to the mysterious part. You are definitely more mysterious than him, but he didn't quite know that yet. So far, you had been the little goth babe of his dreams. Normal, but emo, but you see, y'all had started dating just after your period had ended last month. And so he hadn't been with you through this month's period yet, and truth be told, you weren't sure how he was going to take it. When it was that time of the month, you had this deep, primal urge to return to your great-great-grandmother's house. This was something that all the women in your family line did. Sound cute? Well, yeah, if great-great-grandma had lived in a cute little cottage at the end of a pretty little laneway lined by beautiful green trees and a white picket fence around her yard. But, no. Great-grandma had never lived in a place like that. So, you know those haunted castles in the middle of the wind-torn woods that are written about in Disney storybooks? Yeah? Yeah, that's where great-grandma lived. But times 100 because this place was actually haunted, and you actually did need to go there to recharge your quirk. Your quirk gave you strength and wisdom based on how many of your ancestors you connected with once a month during that time of the month. It had something to do with the cycle of your hormones, the cycle of the moon, and the sacred ancestral energies around you that allowed you to gather their energy better during this time than any other time of the month. And you referred to this process or ritual of enhancing your quirk as the reaping. Trust me, you had tried other ways of going about manifesting your quirk into a higher plane of existence, but this was just it. This was the only way to replenish your quirk stores. You had been doing this since you first got your period, and had made a solid ritual of it by now, right down to the clothes that you wore, the way that you spoke, and the dance steps that you used to invite your ancestors closer to garner their blessings and power. This, to you and to your ancestors, was a very sacred experience, to only be entered into by yourself and later your daughter when it was her turn to gather power from them. You checked your calendar that morning before school started and noted that your period was due to start either later that night or the next morning. Okay, I think it's time for the reaping, you thought as you got your things together for school and then left your room and headed for the elevator. You got in and let it take you to the bottom floor, and then you stepped out, smiling when you saw your boyfriend Tokoyami waiting by the front door, leaning up against the wall beside it with his back against it, keeping most of himself in the shadows that hung around the front entrance of Heights Alliance. "Good morning, my darkness," you said to him. "The morning has now arrived, my light," he replied, keeping his head down, looking cool and mysterious with his arms crossed across his chest as he spoke to you. You walked over and gave him a quick kiss on his cheek, which made him a little flustered, but he tried to hide it as much as he could. "Shall we walk?" he asked, holding his hand out to you as he pushed off the wall and stepped forwards. "Please," you said as you took his hand and turned to walk beside him, holding his hand lightly. "You appear more radiant today," he commented without looking at you. "Oh, you can feel it?" you asked with surprise. "My soul feeds off your energy," he replied. "You quench my thirst, heal the darkness with your presence." You suddenly felt very shy. He was using such strong words this morning. That, and also your quirk was running a little low due to that time of the month, and you were feeling very sensitive and vulnerable. "My lord," you whispered, stopping and turning to him, and then stepping into him and pressing yourself to his side. "Do not say such things. It is hard for me to control myself when you speak this way." Now it was his turn to get flustered, and his innocent mind went into overdrive as he imagined you in a black lace dress with a slit up the side, showing the black garter belt underneath. "Hell's cauldron," he whispered to himself, swallowing thickly to try and get his mind back on track again. You giggled a little and let him go, and then stepped out ahead of him and threw a cheeky look over your shoulder. "Come, my darkness, or we'll be late," you flirted, keeping ahead of him as he followed behind. Tokoyami could tell something was different about you today. You were always very feminine, but even your scent was a little different today, and you appeared to be more alluring than usual. He was a little more awestruck with you than usual, but couldn't quite put his finger on it. All throughout that day, he thought of a way that he could be alone with you, and determined that afternoon he would ask you to dine with him so that you two could be alone together, and intended to take you to one of the local food places in town. It was an underground bar that boasted its origins there of being over 100 years old, and he loved all the old relics inside. He assumed that since he and you had very similar tastes, you would find it enjoyable as well. I might get to see her dressed up a little, he thought, his mind pulling forth that image of you in a black lace floor-length dress with the thigh-high slit in the side, paired with a black choker chain and many black bangles. He was almost on the floor with this image. Oh, how badly he wanted to see you in that. And so at the end of the day, he was on his way to your room when he spotted you leaving, walking down to the elevator. You had on a very large trench coat, and it took him a second to recognize you since he had never seen you in a trench coat before. Where is she going? He wondered, curiously following you, but keeping at a distance. Using his stealth skills, he kept in the shadows of the evening and tailed you out of the school grounds and down to the bus stop. There were a number of bushes and trees nearby, so he was able to hide quite well, and once you had hopped on the bus there, he called for Dark Shadow to emerge so that he could use him to fly. Follow that bus, he commanded his shadow monster, who wove around him and encased his body and arms with his own, and then took to the skies, following above and behind the bus. Tokoyami watched keenly as the bus went around to a few stops in town, and then it started heading out of town, and he dropped back, making sure to keep at an angle where he wouldn't be seen if you were to look out any of the bus windows. Thankfully, by now, it was starting to get quite dark, so if he kept high enough in the sky, you wouldn't have been able to spot him, due to the lack of street lamps out this far, as well as the night sky being void of the moon at that hour. He continued to follow the bus until it stopped at a lonely bus station on the very outskirts of town, your trench coat-clad form exiting the bus and waiting for the bus to leave before you stepped out across the road and headed down a long laneway. Where is she headed? He wondered, as he swooped down now and kept in behind trees and bushes, following you from a distance. It wasn't long before he spotted the most magnificent old castle ahead, and his eyes lit up in the dark. My fair lady visits such an exquisite place, he thought, as he watched you enter the twisted iron gates at the front of the building and walk up the cracked and broken front steps to get to the large double doors with black embellishments on the door fronts. There, you slid your trench coat off to reveal the most stunning black dress he had ever seen. It wasn't floor-length like he had fantasized about in his mind, but it was a cocktail off-the-shoulder piece, and he nearly suffocated he forgot how to breathe. To accompany this gorgeous outfit, you had also on a middle finger ring that had a delicate chain running up the back of your hand and wrapping around your wrist. And then on your other arm you had black bicep cuffs with gold trimmings. He nearly passed away, you looked so beautiful. As you opened the door, you turned to look back over your shoulder to make sure you hadn't been followed, and that's when he saw your choker chain. Who is she seeing in this establishment, looking like the Black Queen of the night? He thought, feeling curious and a little jealous that he had never gotten to see you in that outfit before. As soon as you closed the door behind you, he called for Dark Shadow to once again carry him so that he could watch you. The moon had just entered the night sky then, and was hanging low and yellow at the horizon's edge, and he glanced at it before swooping over the fence and down to look in one of the windows on the bottom level. Making sure to keep low, he kept to the side of one of the windows in the mansion and saw you walking into the foyer area inside. I must get inside, he thought as he looked around, and then saw there was a window up higher that was broken. I can get in up there, he thought to himself, getting Dark Shadow to fly him up and inside the mansion. Once inside, he touched down lightly and called Dark Shadow into himself, and then walked slowly and cautiously along the hall until he came to a balcony that overlooked the lower level. It was much colder inside this mansion than he had been expecting, and his body broke out into a plethora of goosebumps more than a few times, but he ignored these feelings as soon as he saw you below. At first it looked like you were just standing there, but then he listened closely and he could hear you saying names of people. What is this? He thought when he saw glowing forms start to gather around you. The more he watched, the more he became mesmerized by what he saw. One by one you danced with these apparitions, talking and laughing with them like you knew them well. What are these things? He asked himself as he moved closer to get a better look, but as he stepped closer he trod on a fallen piece of wood and it made a crunching sound underfoot. Suddenly he heard a wild scream, that made his hair stand on end, and then the feeling of a tightening around his throat. Terrified, he gasped and grabbed for his neck, but he couldn't feel anything there physically, although the strangulation continued. A remote attack, he thought, assuming he was being attacked by something far away. "Wait, stop!" he heard you call, suddenly from below. "He's my boyfriend! I take responsibility! Don't hurt him!" Suddenly you were beside him, and the pressure around his throat eased, causing him to cough and splutter as his lungs began to work again. "Fumi, why are you here? You shouldn't be here," you gasped with fear. "Please leave now." "I will not leave you, my queen," he rasped, his voice box still a little crushed by the attack. "You are in danger." "No, you don't understand," you begged. "This is a sacred ritual that you've interrupted." A ritual?" he asked with low-key excitement shining in his eyes, the excitement replacing the fear that he had 2 seconds earlier. "Yeah," you replied with a bit of embarrassment. It's my time of the month, and this is when it's best for me to recharge my quirk. To gather my strength and wisdom, I need to call upon my ancestors. All of the women on my mum's side of the family have done this, and when they pass away, they remain in this house as ghosts and apparitions to help me and future generations strengthen for the next month," you said. "No one else is allowed here. If they so wish, they will curse any outsider who comes," you added fearfully. "I will take the blame for being careless," you added. Then you stood up and turned away from him. "Hear me," you called out into the house. "Do not look unfavourably upon my quarter. This was my fault for being careless and not checking to make sure that I hadn't been followed. If I must be cursed for my carelessness, so be it," you said. But suddenly Tokoyami jumped up and in front of you and knelt down on one knee, bowing his head reverently. "Heed not what my lady says," he called out, "for I followed her here without her knowledge. Therefore I will take the blame, give her a double portion of your blessing, and curse me double as penance," he said, bowing so low that you thought he was going to fall over. All was silent for a second, and then a glowing light descended upon him, and you covered your mouth with fear. What were they doing to him? Was this bad? "Oh, Fumi," you cried softly to yourself. "Oh, I'm so sorry." "I feel stronger," he suddenly said after the light had hung over him for a few seconds. You do?" you asked with surprise. "Yes," he replied, and suddenly the glowing light descended upon you too, and you could feel your quirk being revived. "Oh," you gasped with delight and relief. "They have accepted you." "You have my gratitude, honoured elders," Tokoyami said, remaining in a bowed position. After you had received the required fulfillments of your quirk, you ended the ritual with a gentle dance to thank them for their blessings, and then hand in hand you left with Tokoyami. "I'm so sorry. I should have told you about this sooner," you apologised to him as you walked out of the gate with him, your trench coat over one arm. "I didn't think that you would follow me." "No need for apologies, Queen," he replied, releasing Dark Shadow, whom you petted lovingly. "This was your secret reaping, to gather the energies for your quirk. It is not a matter that concerns me, but I am glad to know a little more about you now." "How interesting that you should call it a reaping, since that's what I refer to it as too," you said with surprise as you placed your trench coat back on and placed your hand in his. "You really are my soulmate." Tokoyami blushed and cleared his throat before speaking again. "Allow me to fly us back into town for a late dinner," he offered. "I know of a place you might like." "Oh, I would dearly love that, my darkness," you said with a noble curtsy. He bowed gently and then stepped in closer to you, holding one arm out to pull you in close to him, and with that he scooped you up in his arms and used Dark Shadow to cover himself, and off you flew into the sky, feeling closer than ever before. It's like a dark fairy tale. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed one for our favourite bird boy. I'll see you next week for the next Comfort One Shot. See you then!